Tonight we'll drift through 6 simple dishes, each one a quiet comfort from a kitchen past. Some came from seaside cafes, others from humble staff rooms or early morning bakeries, but all of them in their own way are soft steps toward rest. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let the warmth of familiar flavors guide you gently towards sleep. The first recipe tonight is beans on toast with rosemary, olive oil, and cracked black pepper. At 5 years old, beans on toast was the answer to everything. Cold knees after school, beans on toast. Rainy Saturday mornings with cartoons and blankets, beans on toast. Mum was always 2 steps ahead of the weather, and this was her fix. It arrived on a chipped plate with steam rising and the toast just beginning to soak. I'd eat fast, always burning my tongue a little, always leaving a small trail of sauce at the corners of my mouth. It was sweet, simple, and enough. At 35, after decades of plating towers of food in fine dining rooms, I still find myself reaching for this dish, not from nostalgia, but because it never stopped working. It has evolved with me, grown sharper at the edges, richer in flavor, but never lost its quiet heart. I don't use the tins anymore, not because I look down on them. I don't, but because I now have the time and care to build it slowly. I start with the beans. Cannellini are my go-to, soft, creamy, and better at absorbing flavor than they get credit for. I drain them if canned or soak and simmer if dried, depending on the day and my patience. I warm olive oil in a small saucepan, not rushed, not scorching. Then comes a sprig of rosemary, not chopped, left whole so it can perfume the oil without becoming bitter. A small clove of garlic follows, sliced not too thinly, just enough to soften and release its warmth. The beans go in next, with a splash of water or stock, enough to give them room to relax. I stir them slowly, coaxing them into tenderness. They shouldn't collapse, just yield. A pinch of salt, a grind of black pepper, sometimes a dash of balsamic if the day needs brightness, but not always. Often, I just let the rosemary do its work. Meanwhile, the toast, and this part matters. Not sandwich bread, not something soft or spongy. I use sourdough, thickly sliced. It goes in the pan with a touch of oil, or under the grill, until golden. The crust should resist a little. The middle should stay strong enough to hold what's coming. This toast is a foundation, not just a vehicle. Once the beans are soft and fragrant, and just beginning to thicken, I fish out the rosemary. It's done its part. I spoon the beans generously over the toast. No stacking, no fanciful plating. Just enough to cover, to soak in slowly. A final drizzle of good olive oil, a crack of pepper, maybe a few fresh thyme leaves, if they're on hand, and I'm feeling indulgent. Then I sit. No fork and knife, just hands, or sometimes a spoon. The toast gives a gentle crunch, the beans are warm and soft, and the rosemary lingers just enough to remind you that something thoughtful happened here. Something modest, but deliberate. When I first learned to sous vide lamb or plate sugar spirals, I thought this kind of dish was behind me. But I've come to realize it was ahead of me all along. It's not a fallback, it's a foundation. Because when the world has been too much, or the day has left me scattered, I still toast the bread, simmer the beans, and let that rosemary pull everything back into place. Beans on toast, still warm, still sweet. Only now, served with pride. Good night. That was recipe 1. The second recipe tonight is fish fingers reimagined, pan-fried cod strips with lemon mayo dip. There are foods that outgrow their packaging, that start in foil trays, eaten in school uniforms, or on mismatched plates with chipped enamel. And yet, when you grow older, learn the techniques, travel through professional kitchens, and sharpen your knives, those foods come with you. Not out of nostalgia, out of recognition, out of gratitude. For me, fish fingers are that food. My mum used to burn them, not on purpose. She was just always doing three things at once. The oven timer was more of a guideline than a command. And by the time she'd gotten back from checking the laundry or calming the dog, they were usually overdone. Edges brittle, the breadcrumb coating more dust than crust. But I never said a word, because they were hot, golden, salty, and they were hers. She served them with frozen peas and ketchup, and we'd eat them with our hands too hungry or too tired to care. Years later, in kitchens where I learned how to confit duck legs or poach eggs in red wine, I never once scoffed at fish fingers, because I knew that dish was still in me, just waiting to be spoken again, in a different accent. Here's how I make them now. Still simple, still honest, but with the kind of detail I once wished I could give back to her. First, I start with fresh cod, thick fillets, firm and white. I slice them into long fingers, about the width of 2 fingers pressed together, not too thin. You want bite, not breading. I pat them dry, then season them lightly with salt and a whisper of pepper. Sometimes I add a touch of smoked paprika or lemon zest to the flour. It depends on the day. 3 bowls, flour, beaten egg, and breadcrumbs. Panko, if I'm being proper, or crushed saltines, if I'm feeling homesick. I coat the fish one by one, flour, egg, crumb, pressing the coating gently so it holds. I lay them on a wire rack to rest while the pan heats. This small pause makes them crisp better. I imagine my mum skipping this step. I forgive her again. In a wide skillet, I warm neutral oil, enough to shallow fry. Not too hot, or the coating will scorch before the fish cooks through. I test it with a breadcrumb. If it sizzles gently, it's ready. Then I fry in batches, turning carefully, watching them go golden on each side. The smell of warm oil and salt fills the air, and something in me exhales. They take about 6 minutes, give or take. I rest them on a paper towel, sprinkle with flaky salt while still hot. Now for the dip. Just mayonnaise, good and creamy, a squeeze of lemon juice, a bit of zest, and a crack of black pepper. That's it. Sometimes I add a touch of Dijon or capers if I'm dressing it up, but the truth is, this dip just needs to taste like brightness. I plate them stacked casually, not chefy. A ramekin of dip beside them. A wedge of lemon, if I've got it, but no garnish otherwise. This isn't food that begs attention, it just waits to be eaten. I eat with my fingers, still do, and every time I think about those 2 dark rectangles from the freezer aisle. I think about her looking tired, still smiling. I think about the kitchen light, flickering, and the clatter of knives in the drawer, and how, even burnt, even rushed, those dinners held the kind of love I'd spend years learning how to recreate. So yes, they're fancy now. The cod is fresh, the oil is clean, the breadcrumbs are golden and crisp. But they're still hers. And I serve them not to impress, but to remember. Good night. That was recipe 2. The third recipe tonight is grown-up macaroni and cheese with Dijon, leeks and sharp cheddar. I was raised on the powdered kind, the kind that came in a skinny blue box with noodles shaped like elbows and a silver packet of neon orange dust. Add milk, butter and stir. It was magic. At least it was to me. We'd eat it in front of the TV, bowls balanced on knees, spoonfuls, too hot but eaten anyway. That powdered cheese, for all its artificial glory, never failed to comfort. But kitchens change you. You learn what a roux is. You taste real cheddar that bites back. You discover how a spoonful of mustard can cut through richness like a key through a lock. You stop using boxes, not out of disdain, but because you've been shown another way to tell the same story. This version is mine, the grown-up version. But truth be told, it still makes me feel 10. I start with the pasta. Short shapes work best. Elbows, sure, but cavata or fusilli give the sauce more surface to cling to. I salt the water heavily, like the sea, and boil the pasta until it's just shy of done. It will finish in the oven. That's the trick. While the noodles cook, I begin the base. Butter in a pan, melted low and slow. To it I add thinly sliced leeks, washed carefully to avoid grit. Softened until sweet and golden around the edges. Leeks add earthiness, like memory folded into butter. When they're ready, I stir in an equal amount of flour, maybe 2 tablespoons, to form a roux. I whisk it patiently, letting it bubble and blonde gently. This is the scaffolding. Everything good will hang from here. Then I pour in whole milk, slowly, steadily, whisking all the while. About 2 cups, maybe a splash more, if it feels thick too quickly. The heat stays medium, never rushed. I let it thicken until it coats the back of a spoon. Then the mustard, Dijon, just a teaspoon or 2. Sharp, necessary, like a clarifying truth, whispered into richness. A pinch of cayenne, if the day's been especially cold. Now comes the cheese. Sharp white cheddar is my go-to, grated fresh, not from a bag. I add it in handfuls, stirring between each addition. Gruyere, if I'm feeling indulgent. A bit of Parmesan at the end, for backbone. I taste as I go. The sauce should hum with depth, not shout with fat. The pasta, drained, goes into the sauce. I fold it gently, coating every twist and turn. Then I spoon the mixture into a buttered baking dish. If I want crunch, I scatter breadcrumbs mixed with olive oil and more cheese over the top. If I want softness, I let it bake as is into the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes. Just enough for the top to set and the edges to go golden. The smell fills the kitchen before it's even halfway done. Cheese warmth, something like childhood, returning through the back door. When it comes out, I don't wait long. I serve myself a deep spoonful, no garnish, no plate finesse. Just a warm bowl and a quiet seat. The leeks thread through the cheese, the mustard lingers gently, and the pasta is soft without falling apart. And there I am again, 10 years old, in a living room, with worn carpet, feet tucked beneath me, eating too fast because it's too good. Only now, there's no cartoon on the TV, just a dim kitchen and the echo of all the meals that brought me here. This dish doesn't try to be impressive, it just knows who it is. And sometimes, that's all you need. Good night. That was recipe 3. The 4th recipe tonight is eggy bread with cheese and tomato, savory French toast, grown up. It started as something scrappy, something my dad threw together when the fridge was down to its last few respectable offerings. A couple of eggs, a splash of milk, the heel of a loaf. He'd dip the bread, usually plain white slices, already curling at the edges, into the egg mixture, then drop it into the pan with a bit of butter that always sizzled too quickly. He called it eggy bread, not French toast, and he never sweetened it. Just a slice of cheddar melted on top, and if there was a tomato about to turn, he'd slice it thick and lay it across. Seeds spilling, still cold. I didn't think much of it then. It was just what we ate, but it stuck with me, the way humble things do. That act of making do without apology. Years later, in a borrowed flat with no oven and only 2 working burners, I made it again for myself this time. And in the decades since, I've never stopped. These days, I let it grow up with me. The bones of it are the same, but I've dressed them up a little. The bread becomes brioche or sourdough, thick cut, ideally a bit stale, so it can drink in the egg. The cheese is sharper now, an aged cheddar or Gruyere, something that bites back. And the tomatoes, I roast them slow and low until they collapse in on themselves, skin blistered, juice thickened like jam. But I still eat it over the sink, because some things don't need ceremony. Here's how I do it now. I begin by roasting the tomatoes, cherry or grape, halved and tossed with olive oil, a pinch of salt, and a few rosemary needles or thyme leaves, if I've got them. I spread them out on a tray and slide them into a 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 150 degrees Celsius oven for about 40 minutes. They shrink and concentrate, turning sweet and acidic all at once. They wait quietly on the side until needed. Then the bread, 2 thick slices of brioche or a sturdy sourdough if I want more chew. I whisk together 2 eggs with a splash of milk, salt, and a twist of black pepper. Sometimes a touch of Dijon goes in too, just a hint to add warmth. I soak the bread just long enough to saturate it, but not so much that it falls apart in the pan. Into the skillet it goes, over medium heat, with a knob of butter and a slick of oil to keep it from burning. The egg cooks fast, clinging to the edges, puffing gently. I flip once, letting both sides go golden and crisp. Then the cheese, grated or thinly sliced, goes on while the second side finishes. I cover the pan briefly, just long enough for the cheese to melt. To finish, I lift the slices onto a plate or straight into my hands and pile the roasted tomatoes on top. Their sweetness cuts the richness of the egg and cheese, the way good memory cuts through regret. A final crack of pepper, maybe a scattering of fresh herbs if the day calls for flourish. And that's it. No maple syrup, no powdered sugar, just a grown-up French toast that never stopped being eggy bread at heart. It's the kind of thing I make when I'm alone, but want company. When I don't want to think too hard, but need the feeling that someone's cooked for me. When I want to remember my dad, sleeves rolled up, saying, "Here, eat," like the world had just been fixed. I still eat it standing, leaning over the sink, still warm, still forgiving. Good night. That was recipe 4. The 5th recipe tonight is potato smiles reborn. Crispy smashed new potatoes with sea salt and garlic butter. They used to come in big plastic bags from the freezer aisle. Those potato smiley faces. Perfect circles with stamped on eyes and a half-moon grin. Deep fried at school. Always too hot in the middle and too cold on the edges. But when you were 8, it didn't matter. They were silly, golden, and somehow made lunch feel like recess. I loved them more than I let on. There was something joyful about biting into a face that smiled back, even if it was made of reconstituted mash and hope. And though I haven't had one in years, the memory stays vivid. Cafeteria trays, chipped forks, and that reckless abandon of dipping everything in ketchup just to make it feel like yours. Now I'm older, and frozen smiley faces have given way to something quieter, something I can make with my own hands. I don't shape them into faces anymore, but I do still chase that same joy. I just trade the factory uniformity for something more honest. Baby potatoes, smashed and crisped, until the edges fray like paper, glazed in garlic butter, and finished with good sea salt. Here's how I do them. I start with new potatoes, small waxy ones, no bigger than a golf ball. Yukon Golds are ideal, but any baby potato will do. I scrub them clean and drop them into a pot of salted water. I boil them just until they're fork tender, soft enough to yield, but not fall apart. Then I drain them and let them steam off for a few minutes. This part matters. A little dryness on the surface means better crisping later. Once they're cool enough to handle, I lay them on a baking sheet lined with parchment and press each one gently with the bottom of a glass or a heavy mug. Not too hard. You want them to crack and spread, not collapse. Each one turns into its own little map of cracks and ridges, perfect for catching butter. In a small pan, I melt butter with a clove or two of minced garlic, low and slow, so the garlic softens but doesn't brown. Sometimes I add a sprig of thyme or rosemary, just to perfume the butter. I brush this over the smashed potatoes, getting into every crevice. Then a drizzle of olive oil, a scatter of flaky salt, and into a hot oven they go. 425 degrees Fahrenheit, or 220 degrees Celsius, for about 25-30 minutes. Flipping once if I remember. They crisp at the edges, go golden underneath, and hiss when you pull them out. I serve them hot. No cutlery, just fingers and napkins, and a little quiet. They don't need ketchup. They don't need anything really. Maybe a squeeze of lemon, or a shaving of Parmesan, if I'm feeling generous. But often it's just salt and garlic, and heat doing what they do best. I eat them standing at the counter, one by one, still half listening for a school bell that hasn't rung in decades. I think about those old smiley faces, how they meant something, even if I didn't have the words then. How food doesn't have to be perfect, or even impressive. Sometimes it just has to remind you that you're still allowed to be delighted. And these potatoes, they do that. Every single time. Good night. That was recipe 5. The 6th recipe tonight is toad in the hole. Now with herbed sausage and slow-cooked onion gravy. As a child, I thought it was the funniest name in the world, toad in the hole. No one really knew why it was called that, or if there had ever been an actual toad involved. But the absurdity of it, the way the sausages peeked out from the golden pudding, like little creatures crawling through batter, was enough to make me laugh every time. Mum made it on chilly Sundays, the kind where the sky turned grey by mid-afternoon and the heating clicked on before the dinner was even in the oven. Her version was humble, cheap sausages, basic batter, and sometimes it stuck to the tin no matter how much oil she used. But it filled the house with the smell of warmth, sage, pork, eggs, and roasted air. We'd eat it fast, drowning it in bisto from a packet, and for a few minutes everything was exactly as it should be. I didn't think about that dish for years, not until I moved into my first place with a proper oven and a cast iron pan, and I caught a craving, not for the food itself, but for that sensation, that ridiculous comforting joy of sausages in a Yorkshire pudding blanket. Now I make it differently, still with the same sense of mischief, but with care that only comes from growing up and learning what these dishes really mean. The kind of care that says this is simple, but it matters. I start with the sausages, good ones. Herbed pork with rosemary, or thyme, or even Cumberland, if I can get them. I brown them gently in a cast iron skillet, just enough to give them color, and start rendering some of that fat. Then I lift them out and let them rest while I make the batter. The batter's a Yorkshire base, 3 eggs, a cup of flour, and a cup of whole milk with a pinch of salt. I whisk it until smooth, then let it rest, at least 30 minutes. It's the rest that gives it its puff, its drama. Meanwhile, I preheat the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, or 220 degrees Celsius, and slide the empty pan back in, letting it get scorching hot. When everything's ready, I pour a little vegetable oil into the skillet, just enough to shimmer, and return the sausages to their places. Then the batter goes in, quick and confident. It should sizzle the moment it hits. I slide it into the oven and close the door, no peeking. While it bakes, 30, maybe 35 minutes, I make the onion gravy. I slice 2 onions thin and cook them down in butter, low and slow, until they're soft, golden, and sticky. A bit of flour to thicken, then beef stock, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, and a grind of black pepper. I let it simmer until rich and glossy, the way only patience can make it. When the toad in the hole is done, it's impossible not to smile. The batter climbs the sides of the pan in crisp, golden waves. The sausages nestled inside like old friends returning to roost. It smells of Sunday comfort and pub laughter, of coats hung by the door and mugs cooling on the table. I cut it into thick wedges and spoon over the onion gravy, sweet, sharp, and deep as anything I've ever made. It's still silly, still a dish with a name that makes no sense. But now, it feels earned, a joke I'm in on, a memory remade with better tools, but the same old heart. And as I eat it, slowly this time, I think not everything has to grow up all the way. Some things are better when they stay a little ridiculous, a little warm, a little like home. Good night. That was recipe 6. The 7th recipe tonight is sweet corn fritters with a frayed egg and chili jam. This was always what Nan made when there was nothing in. Flour, tinned corn, a little love. I serve them now with a runny egg and a whisper of heat. Not fancy, just remembered. This was what Nan made when there was nothing in. And by that she meant no meat, no plans, and not much light left in the day. But she'd always manage something golden. Flour, tinned sweet corn, a bit of onion or spring onion if one was left rolling in the crisper, and enough instinct to bring it together in a bowl. The first sizzle always made the dog lift its head. She didn't call them fritters. She just said, "They'll do," and fried them by eye. Shapes never matching, browning wherever the pan was hottest. We'd eat them at the table in our coats because the heat had been off all day, with tea gone slightly cold and jam spooned straight from the jar. Furs wasn't chili jam, it was the sweet one. Cheap, red, tasted mostly of sugar, but it was right. Now, years later, I make them when I feel that familiar lull, the nothing in sort of moment. When the fridge looks empty, but I need something hot and honest, and maybe a little sharper around the edges. Here's how I do them now, with just enough form to feel grown up and just enough memory to keep them hers. I start with the corn. If it's summer and fresh cobs are cheap, I'll slice the kernels straight off. But more often than not, I use tinned, rinsed, and well drained. About 1.5 cups. I mix that in a bowl with 1 finely chopped spring onion, a pinch of salt, cracked black pepper, and a handful of fresh herbs, if I've got them. Parsley or chives work best. Then in goes a lightly beaten egg, 2-3 tablespoons of plain flour, and a splash of milk just to bring it together. The texture should be thick enough to hold on a spoon, but loose enough to spread when it hits the pan. While that rests for 5 minutes, I heat a non-stick pan with a little oil, vegetable or olive, depending on the mood. I drop in spoonfuls of the batter, letting them sizzle until golden on one side before flipping. They puff just slightly, the edges crisping, the corn turning sweet and nutty with the heat. While the last batch fries, I crack an egg into the pan next to them. I like it sunny side up, yolk still runny, edges a little lacy. Just enough oil to bubble, not enough to drown. Then I plate it, 3 fritters, stacked like coins, the egg draped on top, a spoonful of chili jam on the side. Just enough to swipe a corner through, to get that jolt of heat and sweetness against the corn and the salt. It's not elegant, it's not even really a recipe, but it's warm, it's filling, and it's familiar, in the kind of way that doesn't demand to be named. When I sit down to eat it, I think of Nan standing in the kitchen, spoon in hand, batter on her sleeve. No cookbook, no timing, just a sense for when something was good enough, and it always was. So now, when the cupboards feel bare, and I'm not sure what I need, this is what I make. It's not fancy, just easy before bed, when the night calls for it. Good night, that was recipe 7. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep.